Welcome to Understanding the Exceptional Mind podcast. I'm Dr. John, and today's conversation is with Dr. Michael Volrich. Dr. Mike is my friend. He is a colleague. He is my business partner, and he's a very interesting, intelligent, and entertaining individual. Neither Dr. Mike or myself can regulate our thinking, so in this conversation, we're kind of all over the place. But I think what you'll see in this conversation and what you'll hear will be entertaining and informative nonetheless. We go into topics related to how the diagnostic system is broken and some of the frustrations there, how and why so many diagnoses are on the rise, and a whole bunch of different topics around those two. So again, I hope you enjoy it and I hope you get something meaningful out of it. Come and join us at understandingexceptional.com and across our social media platforms. And I look forward to seeing you on our next video. This is Understanding the Exceptional Mind podcast / conversation. I have the pleasure to be joined by, can I call you a friend? Are we there yet?
Mentor?
Mentor is better.
Mentee?
Is that how that works? This is Dr. Michael Volrich. He's a good friend of mine, a colleague. He's actually my business partner. And I'm really excited for our conversation. One of the reasons Understanding Exceptional came to be was because of our morning conversations. We get in at the crack of dawn and we go off on our rants.
Not the UFO ones.
Not the UFO ones.
Okay. That's a later podcast or what?
That we'll be discussing that. That's question 4. So we'll get there. But we have discussions related to various aspects of what we do. Psychology, you're a neuropsychologist, I'm a neuropsychologist, but it expands into the fields of psychiatry, psychology, mental health. And a lot of what we talk about is frustrations, if we're being honest, frustrations with the field. So that's what today's conversation, a lot of it will be about. But before I get there, you started out as a student of mine and you separated yourself from the other students I had because of your drive, your good looks, your height, just
your
slight of voice.
Is this a slide of my height?
Beautiful.
I'm taller than you.
It's beautiful. We call you the songbird of your generation, but we're not going to go there just yet. That'll be another one.
Just spit up water in my nose.
But you had a passion for learning more, and you had a passion for helping others. And one thing I've come to realize in this field, in any field where people endeavor to help others, and they have a passion to do that, that passion comes from somewhere. Usually it's a personal experience. It's usually not something academic.
I'm so sorry as you're talking here. I got
what are we doing? Did you spill water?
Some water.
Oh
so
my gosh.
We're gonna see that.
We have AI. We can filter that out.
Right,
we'll put a little blur there. So your passion separated you. Your passion for learning more, and probably more importantly, your passion for helping others. And so what I've experienced is that people that really truly have a pure passion for helping others, that comes from somewhere. So I was wondering, just to kind of set the stage for who you are, where did your passion for helping those you work with come from?
Well, I was going to say 2 things. Apologies in advance. My Vans is wearing off, so you're going to see a little bit
doing a crash
here.
Might fall asleep. I'll wake you up.
Iggy's hair is all over my shirt, so that's why I've been picking at that.
Iggy, I'm sure we'll be making a stop in here later, so you get to meet him.
Anyway, go back to your question. So passion.
Yeah.
So you know about my dad.
Mm-hmm.
For the audience here, Dad had brain cancer. Kind of at the end of high school here. Didn't know anything about it. I wanted to go to college to make a lot of money, so I was like, I want to go radiology or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And as he was going through his progression of his cancer and metastasizing to his brain, he was having brain surgeries. He had chemo, all this different stuff. And I was in like a learning and cognition class or something in an undergrad. And I still remember learning about this condition called prosopagnosia and face blindness, right? Lesion there. So after one of his surgeries, he ended up having or developed the prosopagnosia condition and face blindness. So he lost the ability to detect facial features. So it was fascinating to me at the time because I was like, I don't really know what I want to do, but I found the brain always kind of interesting. Dad was always logical, kind of felt that way. So I started gravitating towards that, learning more, and then, following that kind of whole situation, started investing a little bit more into the brain, understanding like, hey, how can I pursue this professionally? But adults are awful to work with. So not the parents.
Touche. Yeah.
Adult clients are hard to work with.
Yeah.
Pediatrics is so much more fun. So
Yeah.
then I was like, okay, shifted that, graduate school, obviously connected with you, and then some other mentors in the field. Here we are. So it's more born out of kind of a curiosity. It's always been there. Always thought kind of like medical side of things was interesting, but narrowed it down to brains and brain development particularly, right? So in pediatrics, that's what we're looking at a lot of times, right? Is how the development of that thing regulates and adapts behavior. And so I think it stemmed from not wanting to be in with the adults. Kids are way more fun. I still have a pediatric brain, as you probably can tell. That's why this works here. And I'd 100% not be in this outfit right now if I did not have an evaluation earlier.
Yeah, you're a little overdressed.
You're very
to be
comfortable.
honest.
Not
It's kind of embarrassing.
I got made fun of, by the way, of these shoes like probably a month ago by a kid. He said they look like pilgrim shoes.
Wow. Well, since I'm a fashionista, I'm going to withhold
Your
comment.
socks are way better than mine, though. But no, seriously, for the shoes, my dad used to have a pair or he had a bunch of pairs.
Yeah.
But he had like little tassels on it.
Yeah,
And I was just
right
making
on.
fun, like, saying,
Old
"Those are the
school.
most moronic looking shoes in the world," and here I am wearing very similar shoes.
Same thing. You're turning into your dad. It seems to turn out that way. So your passion, born from a very unpleasant experience, but it ignited that fire around the power that the brain has, and obviously don't let me put words into your mouth, but so then you also have a passion simply for one of the reasons that you and I joined up was because we connected on the level of we want to help individuals that do things differently, think differently, feel differently, learn differently, regulate differently, help them to navigate this world that's kind of built for the, we'll say, neurotypical brain. So any comments related to your passion there? Because the passion that you have to help a 9-year-old, while your fascination comes obviously from your experiences with your dad, which I'm very sorry about, but it ignited a flame in you that you have parlayed into helping so many people.
Is that a redhead joke?
Where?
It's a redhead joke.
Touche on that one as well. Wow, we had a couple zingers. Zoom. So, but where does your passion then for those little guys and little gals that you work with, where does that come from?
So we've talked about this. People probably see am I supposed to point to the camera, or do
I don't know how it works.
This is weird. This is
I'm
not a podcast version.
not exactly Robert Redford here, so.
Who?
Yeah, keep going. You're just young and you're
weird.
embarrassing yourself at this point. So
Like motor tics, right? So heavy blinking once in a while. But I used to have really bad tics as a kid. So I'd have like a neck rolling tic. And you go back like any home video, and my mom will still comment on this. She's like, stand still, stop moving. And I was like, oh, okay. You get a little neck tic. And again, at the point, nobody knows what that is.
Right.
My mom was in speech pathology, but she wasn't necessarily attuned to like, what are we looking at?
and she's mom. You need to stand still
and
take this picture.
Little redhead, kind of crazy, wild child.
Right.
But the tics were interesting at the time because didn't know what they meant. But now as you learn more and more and more kind of in this field and how the brain operates, and then you can start appreciating what that behavior actually tells you, what's happening inside the brain when you have kind of an involuntary tic like that. And then you start working with kids that way. And as I said, I think kids, they're innocent, right? They're just navigating the world on whatever terms that their parents or education system puts on them. And so they're often kind of feeling displaced, or they're not really grounded, right? So they're just going along with the flow.
Right.
And a lot of the kids that you work with, right, they're seeking autonomy, they're trying to figure this out, but obviously their brains aren't developed enough at that point to really establish that. And so I always look at it as, if there's any way that we can help build that blueprint for this kid that might be operating at a little bit different wavelength than others, not better, not worse, just different. I was talked to a parent about this today. It's like, you don't see behavior as good or bad. It's adaptive or maladaptive, or
good way to look at it.
Misaligned with the environment. And so whether that's learning, it's attention, it's motor, etc., there's not a good or a bad behavior. Now society will impose that, right? It's like, we decide this is a good one, this is a bad one.
Normal, abnormal, good, bad, average.
Stop interrupting.
I apologize. I apologize.
You need to.
I'm taking a drink, so you can go.
When people bounce their foot up and down the ground, I was talking to this parent about that's a normalized anxious behavior, but it's predictable feedback, right? Your brain's trying to generate something to offload internal arousal. It's no different than biting your fingernail than it is, fidgeting with something. But sometimes we normalize behavior when we don't really understand the other ones, right? So when a kid is rocking in their chair, or they're, spinning, or they're flapping, we see that as abnormal, but that's just subjected to the societal standard. It's a regulatory behavior. It's finding stability.
Serves a purpose.
So I always look at that as like, those are the kids that are outcasts. Those are the kids that are written off as weird, dumb, strange, etc. Like those buzzwords that society just throws on kids, right? Told you my medication wore off. But at the end of the day, I look at that as like, there's an opportunity not to fix the brain, because there's no fixing it, but it's supporting how their brain is wired in a world that won't understand it, right? And so if I have that opportunity, I'm going to take it however I can. And I don't do therapy, but no one would want to listen to me do therapy. My professors hated
some therapy
at
before
arts,
we go there. Yeah, so you and I talk about that quite a bit. This idea that ultimately, through our evaluations, both of us being neuropsychologists, we're not really looking for, certainly not for a diagnosis per se. We're going to get to that in a moment, but more so we're looking at what's happening with the brain, because you have to have a brain to have behavior. And if we have behavior that's seen as maladaptive, or it is maladaptive, then number one, it's coming from the brain, and number two, it's serving a purpose, so it's communicating something. So our role, as we've talked about, is really to find the tools that align with the brain, that allow that individual, when they put forth the effort, to achieve the successes and the outcomes they desire and deserve. And so, that's something you and I have talked about so many times, and that's really the fundamental, that's the foundation of what we do here at our practice. And it's a good segue into the sort of the heart of this discussion, which is the frustrations around the field, and in particular diagnoses themselves. So you and I have talked about the idea that are you comfortable? Do you need me to?
I feel weird modeling you, because this is like, I'm too close to you.
It's
I know
you're trying to flatter me. That's fine.
Right. I mean, sorry, I'll stop interrupting you.
So this is us, though. This is like every morning discussion, but. So, we talk about the idea that one of the more frustrating aspects, interestingly, about what we do is the diagnosis itself. I mean, you'd think, okay, well, you're going to come in, a family's going to come in, we're going to do a battery of tests, we're going to have a word, we're going to give them the word, they're going to head out into the real world, and everything's fixed. But you and I have really discovered, and it was really kind of the genesis of the Understanding Exceptional project to begin with, was the frustrations with the system, and the diagnostic system itself is very broken. And you and I have expressed that idea that there aren't really words to describe behavior, and that the diagnoses themselves are simply representations, or we're trying to jam up behavior into a set of words. And then we pretend those set of words are meaningful, and then we start the interventions. But the words don't really exist. No blood draws, no cheek swabs, no hair follicle tests for ADHD or dyslexia or anxiety or depression. So maybe I'm answering the question, so I need to ask one.
Here? It's just
so
an hour.
The question being, what have you found? So you're relatively new to the field. What have you found to be frustrating about the diagnostic process when you're working with families?
It's a big question, because you have the institutional aspect, and then you have like the social media side, right? So how many kids have you seen that they're like kind of late teens, and they come in and they say, I think I have ADHD, or some like new like frame that they say.
Right.
You never want to like dismiss their experience, right? They're coming to you and they're communicating something, so obviously there's enough rapport, there's trust there. But at the same point, it's like, I think social media does a really bad job of portraying what we've been talking about, which has now substituted what mainstream like psychology has done for a long time. Is they've treated it like a medical model, right? So you have a diagnosis. If you went to your primary care physician and you said, my behaviors, my symptoms are a sore throat, a fever, I have some sweats, and they said, superficial check, we're just going to ask you questions about those symptoms again, not do any like maybe cultures or anything. They're just going to say, it sounds like this, throw some antibiotics at it and see what happens, and maybe they don't. But rarely does that happen, right? You'd go in and let's say you're having kind of chronic illness or something like that. They're going to run labs, right? They're going to do imaging, maybe they'll do blood work for sure. They're not just going to take it for your word, right? Because they want to know the etiology. this is not a field where you can understand an etiology of something, right?
Right.
Because you can't see what's happening in there. Even if you had imagery, you still don't get to understand the moment by moment behavior, right? And so I always look at it as a diagnosis to me would be a framework. Unfortunately, our systems have sold it like a medical model. So, a parent thinks, does or does my kid not have autism?
Right.
And that's not the right question to ask, or ADHD or any of these diagnoses, because it's not like a is or isn't. It's more so, is there enough adaptive constraint across certain conditions that warrants the use of a diagnosis? Because, our diagnostic manual, right, is like that thick, filled with 900 diagnoses, et cetera. And again, I'm not trying to fault the system in the sense of like they're trying to do something harmful. They're not. They're doing administrative coding. That's the whole purpose of the diagnostic system, right? It's just to give the code to help shared language amongst providers, right? That's the unified approach. But parents in society have adopted that as it's a description of my child and who they are, right? So instead of my kid has a diagnosis, it's that kid's autistic, right? And that's not
interesting.
I always look at it not like in the PC happy-go-lucky thing, but most so like there's no such thing as autism as a singular phenotype, right? Like there's not a single kid that presents the exact same way as the next one. And so we assume that when we, call it a diagnosis, is that must mean there's a root,
definitive,
a singular cause
and
here.
A cure potentially.
Correct, right? It's something to be eliminated,
right?
Which obviously is not the case, and so you always look at it through this framework, or the frustration mounts because you have to use diagnoses to support intervention, right? Intervention cannot exist without a framework to go from, right? Insurance is not going to work off of, hey, I think you need this. Why? You didn't call it anything, so it doesn't exist.
Right.
Well, so obviously if a parent's coming in here, there's a range of adaptive challenges that they've observed. Now, the extent of those, the context at which they emerge, that's kind of what guides that diagnostic process for us. But by no means are after, an evaluation like this or anyone's evaluation, you're not saying your kid is autistic, because that's not a thing. It's your kid meets criteria for this framework of autism to facilitate support in these areas to help adapt them in those, right? So I was looking at that framework is the diagnostic system has been presented as like an etiology, right? In our field is this is why your behavior exists because you're autistic or you're ADHD or you can't read because you're dyslexic. No, it's a descriptive term that we'll have to use to facilitate support.
Right.
That's my rant for the day.
Yeah. No, that was good. I mean, we talk about this constantly. The idea that the words themselves are simply descriptions of behaviors that are born from brains that have developed and function differently. So different it could mean a variety of different things, and and a diagnosis isn't an end point. It is a beginning to look at what tools or what interventions are needed to interact with that brain. And that's what we do at our practice in neuropsychology and theory.
This just made me think two things.
Yeah, the 5 minutes is wearing off.
I know. First, is my shirt
the water's gone?
Enough? No,
the water's
gone.
gone.
The water's gone, but is it like flat enough? Like
it looks fine. Yeah.
Second, more
You
importantly,
look very, very fit.
Thank you. That's been working out. I have not in a long time. But when a parent when I do my feedback sessions, I don't know if you do this, but I'll tell a parent, your kid came in today and tomorrow is going to be the same exact kid. A diagnosis doesn't change who they are, right? They're the same exact kid as they came in, and so they'll leave. The change ultimately is like a blueprint, if you will, is the reports, the diagnostics. It's a blueprint for those working with them, whether it's school, it's clinical, private, whatever, at home, as a framework to kind of build off of to say, here's some tools that will make adaptation easier under these demands, right? Because again, you're not curing the brain of anything, because it's not broken. There's just misalignment between environmental demand and internal processing. And so again, we always think of the brain, right? It's just like singular thing that's going to do its own, and it's not. It's a response to the environment, right? So in certain contexts, behavior is more adaptive, in others it's not. So in that adaptation, the response to the environment is more strained across enough conditions. Yeah, it's worthwhile using a diagnosis to facilitate support, and it's not, obviously pulling a rabbit out of the hat, right? But I always look at it in that framework is minimize the diagnosis as the focal point, because it's not. It's a term for a piece of paper to help access tools, because it's not the end all be all, as you said. It's just simply a means to facilitating the next steps to whatever support they're going to get, right? So
different tools, different brains, different tools, different vehicles, different tools. It's all the same, and that really is our role as we see it as neuropsychologists. It's not to say that we haphazardly just throw out terms or give just write down terms to get individuals something. There is a process there. But so many kids, would you agree? So I'll put it out there and you tell me what you think. There's so many individuals we work with that there isn't a word. They're just locked in the gray area, not for better, not for worse, but there isn't just a singular ADHD or anxiety. Is this ADHD? Is it anxiety? Is this depression? Is this, are we on the autism spectrum? Is this Tourette? Like, it could, in many ways, be any one of those. So when you experience that situation, how do you determine, okay, we're in a gray scenario. We're not just definitively it is because it perfectly fits this. How do you make a determination regarding what direction you go diagnostically from there?
It's good. So I know earlier we said we were talking about like tests, right? So assuming you probably have a mix of people that would either have had evaluations before or are seeking evaluation. So for most people, they think, I'm going to go get my kid evaluated, testing, right? So testing in most circumstances, medical would be blood work, imaging, something like that.
Some objective.
Whereas there's objectivity in the sense is we're not trying to participate in the process, but obviously we're a variable in that process, right? So a kid comes in, we're doing a bunch of tests with them to kind of understand how cognition, thinking often operates under different contexts, right? To me, honestly, while the kid is a huge component of this process, is to work with them, put eyeballs on them, see how they, process information, not just simply the end product, but understanding the development is more important to me. Is understanding the right questions to ask in history, because you can do all this testing and have no context, and it means nothing. And this is where I think a lot of people struggle. Is I don't know how far am I allowed to go? I don't want to bash people, but I'm not going to name names. But a lot of our system historically has been just do the test. If it's average, if it's below average, above average, that's how we're going to rate things. And it's like, but it doesn't give you context if you don't have history to back it, right? So I need to know, early milestones. I want to know medical history. I want to know genetic syndromes. I want to know if there's any, patterns of behavior that we can look back tracing to say, it may not look the exact same way, but if you understand how brain systems work, you can start to track kind of puzzle pieces, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times that's the issue in our field is we don't really take a really thorough dive at understanding what historical markers look like, right? So obviously, everything that we do is for the purpose of trying to understand the brain, right? Is understand how that kid's brain works with cognition, thinking, feeling, motor, movement, right? But the often is the case is we just kind of cherry pick, and I think that's the fault of the field is you can go to 10 different psychologists and get 10 different opinions on the same thing, right?
Yep.
And that to me shows an imprecise system because as you said, you can have a slew of diagnoses that could present, if you will, in the right context to warrant the use of it. And so how many kids you work with where they come in and they have like 8 different diagnoses on there, and you're like, well, which one are you treating? Which one responds to what medication? Which one is
right?
Because it's one brain, right? What you're looking at is one brain where adaptation struggles across different demands. And so I always look at it as I talked to a parent in a feedback last week about this. I was like, I'm going to use multiple diagnoses here, but it's not to understand those as parallel individual things. They are simultaneous representations of this brain under certain demand, right? Wow. So if you have a kid diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia, it's not like, oh, this is the ADHD part right here, and this one's the dyslexia part right here. Yeah. You're looking at the brain that struggles with adaptation under multiple demands, and it just happens to impair aspects of reading fluency at some level, right? So I always think of it that route is it's not like there's not one diagnosis that will ever define anyone, much like, what's up, Iggs?
There he is.
Come here. Get up here. Come here. Oh, awesome. What are you doing?
Just got dissed.
Weird dog.
Oh, here he comes.
Come here. Get up here.
Oh,
what a loser. Come on.
Go up there. So keep going. He'll do his thing.
Come on. Get up here.
Oh, there it is.
What were we talking about?
I think it was space or ETs or... Wait, hold on.
You're so weird.
Well, you're just talking about the context by which we look at the behavior.
Yeah. Well,
and diagnoses themselves.
multiple diagnoses, right? And so I always think of that as when we paint this picture that there's all these silos of diagnoses, it makes it really challenging because, again, a parent will come in and say, I'm not sure if this is the ADHD or if this was the autism that's impacting them here. And so, again, I'm not expecting parents to have any like depth on what this stuff means as long they're observing behavior and their experiences are genuine, much like teachers' experiences or anyone involved with kids. It's just a matter of how they observe context, right? It's like, what's that behavior look like and how much does it adapt or constrain adaptation under certain demand?
Yeah.
So that's how I view diagnoses, right? They're just a means to an end to say we're constrained in these areas enough that without support, they're going to continue to struggle. So with support, it's just helping them move along into that system because I know you use have you introduced like the Honda Ferrari?
I'm not familiar with that. Yes.
Is that not
Honda, for anyone watching here, we talk about the idea that a brain that wires typically, neurotypical, however we want to phrase it, those are your Hondas, and the world's built for the Honda brain, right? So teaching curriculums and behavioral expectations, social expectations. But if you have a Honda for a kiddo, a Honda for a brain, you're not going to come here because the world's already built for them. So you don't encounter significant issues.
Wonderful brains, by the way.
Yeah.
It's not life is easy, but enough.
Right. But in systems that are built for a specific, because a lot of brains really do, in many regards, develop and function in a relatively similar manner. If we go to reading, learning, sounds and sound sequences and pairing sounds with symbols, a lot of brains do that in a pretty predictable manner.
The curriculum, right, is the same.
Exactly. So that curriculum works perfectly. That's the Honda curriculum. But then there's a whole bunch of people, smaller percent, but a whole bunch of people who learn sounds or hear sounds or process sounds and apply sounds to symbols differently.
Yeah.
And it's not that they can't do it, but they do it differently. And that's part of the problem with this system. But those individuals, the Ferraris, if you will, because it's a good metaphor, a Ferrari's not a broken vehicle, it's not damaged, it's not pathological, it just operates differently.
Sure.
And I know you can attest to this. Many of the kids we work with who are neurodivergent, whatever term you want to use, are some of the brightest among us. They're some of the most creative. They're some of the funnest humans to interact with. They all have unbelievable strengths. I cannot imagine a scenario where we've worked with someone where we haven't thought they are so unbelievably good at this, no matter where they are.
Yeah.
And so, that Honda Ferrari analogy with Honda's kind of being the neurotypical and the Ferrari being the neurodivergent seems to resonate. So
it made me think. I completely blanked one time talking to a parent, and I was like, I'm not really sure because I used that, or I was like, Ferrari with bicycle brakes or something like that.
There's a book or something. Yeah.
But I was like, is that a metaphor? And now I don't know the difference. And I got stuck. And it was actually like an English teacher. I think it's an analogy.
Yeah. Metaphor. Yeah, keep going on. Now you got me thinking I'm having a hard time regulating.
It'd be pretty embarrassing if you got it wrong, huh?
Yeah.
Because it's only on.
Well, we can edit that out. Yeah.
Sure. But no, I always I think about that, and one of the things actually that I take pride in, it's not an act, it's literally just how my brain works. You couldn't tell, right? This works watching this. A lot of the kids that will come in here, right, the parents are concerned with X, Y, and Z, and it's not that we're here to compare, like, this is what I experienced when I was a kid. But we clearly did okay, right? Like, and I would say, I don't know how much your childhood has been publicized into this process, but you weren't, Johnny A student, right?
Yeah, it was. I was not at the top of my class. We'll just say it.
Right.
Leave it at that.
And so again, that's not just simply I didn't try, but there's things that preclude how the brain's adapting into certain environments, and it's not an excuse, but it certainly misaligns in enough environments where you start to feel like maybe I'm dumb, maybe I'm stupid.
Yeah.
Exactly, right? And so if you start having, the kids will come in here and then they start to realize, the person sitting across from me is probably a little Ferrari, right?
A little dysregulated themselves.
Dysregulated. This is why I have
That's regulating, right?
He knows that I need regulation.
That's very cute.
And I started the show here, although the beginning of that was ridiculous.
I'm not getting up here. I know you just total diss. Just totally put the hand.
No, but like I said, I mean, to circle back, it's like when we understand what drives action, what drives behavior, right? And behavior is not compliance, it's everything and anything that we operate from. It starts to normalize what is often ambiguous for people, right? Is like, I don't know why my kid can pay attention for 9 hours straight if they play a video game, but 3 seconds into this math task, they're completely space cadet, right? And it's like, when you can start to tell parents why behavior happens this way, what is it actually telling you? It doesn't make it easier, but it makes it less ambiguous, which ultimately makes your response to it a little bit easier. So instead of thinking of it as, oh, they're just choosing not to do it, right? They're intending to do this, and oppositional, defiant, like those types of terms get slapped on so many kids right here. But you start looking at that through the mechanism of behavior is communication, right? And it may not be aligned with the environment, but it's telling you something, right? And so we have the luxury of going to school, and I don't know how much school helped us, practicum, training, internship, all the real practical experience in clinical work helps you contextualize like what is behavior, why does it exist, where does it come from, why is it adaptive in some context, not another, and then when it misaligns enough, how do we support it? Because that's what most parents come from, right? It's like diagnoses, right? Circling back to that, I find a lot of parents don't really care at the end of the day. They want to know, how do we help, right? So
love this person, what do I do?
Exactly. A diagnosis is the medium at which we can do that. That's awesome. But I want to help my kid not struggle, right? Because what parent wants to be frustrated? What parent wants to see their kid frustrated? Right. I don't want to see that. So I always look at it as that kind of a collaboration. We're here for one purpose, is to understand how this kid operates. And obviously, there's many mediums at which that looks, but.
And one of the things we talk about too, and I think this is incredibly important, is the idea that at the end of the day, parents, moms and dads, grandmas and grandpas, family, caregivers, parents are always their child's best medical doctor, best psychologist, best psychiatrist, best teacher. They always know that human being better than anyone on the planet except for that human being themselves. Because you made the point, which I think is an important one. At the end of the day, no matter how much schooling you've had, or you find me the greatest psychiatrist, the most unbelievable psychologist out there, they have no idea what I'm thinking at any given moment. No matter what I tell them, they could ask me a question and I could tell them something that is exactly the opposite of what I'm thinking, and their assumption is based on that interaction that they're figuring me out.
Play off of like heuristics, right? Is this just kind of rule of thumb? If this, then that, if this, then that, and that's kind of what our field works off of. Yeah.
And that rolls us into sort of the overarching point here, that the diagnostic system, when you have a subjective classification system, so if you work with a child, you may diagnose A, B, and C. Mm-hmm. And they go to psychiatrist down the street who diagnoses A, C, and E. Who's right? And at the end of the day, what we have to recognize as a human existence reality is that there isn't anything definitive. Those words aren't meaningful. What is true about anyone that's had a diagnosis or any form of neurodivergence, this is one thing I can promise you, anyone that's neurodivergent has a brain. So the neurodivergence has to start in the brain. So now our goal as a field is, as psychology, psychiatry, neurology, neuropsychology, all of them, we should really be focusing on what areas of the brain are operating differently, what have developed and functioned differently, not necessarily negatively or less than, but what's happening differently. So now what behaviors are we seeing as a result? Because once we understand that link, then we can really answer the question, which you alluded to. Parents aren't as much concerned with what's it called. They're almost always really invariably most interested, what do I do? I love this human, what do I do? Word. So the diagnostic system, twofold, is problematic. Number one, it's subjective, because you could diagnose one thing, I could diagnose the same individual with another, who's right? Sure. With another set of diagnoses, who's right? And so it's a subjective classification system. And the second problem that, as we see it, is it's pathologically oriented. So in other words, if you have a brain that operates differently, you learn sounds differently, you pair sounds with symbols differently, a parent can't just go into a school and say, hey, my child's struggling with learning letters, learning letter names, learning letter sounds, decoding. Well, okay, great. Well, we'll tell them to try harder. You have to we need to evaluate, we need to diagnose, we need to come up with a we need to see if they have dyslexia. And one of the problems we have out there is you can even bring the top 5 dyslexia experts on the planet right here, and you ask them individually, what is dyslexia? You're going to get different answers.
Sure.
So now we've created a system that's subjective, so people can disagree over what it's called or what is actually happening, and it's pathologically oriented. So parents have to enter a system where, number one, they have to sort of swallow the pill, or at least be willing to say something's wrong with my child, so I can just get this person I love so much what they need, and then I got to rely on people who might disagree.
Well,
so I don't know if you.
I was going to say I was thinking a couple of things, because obviously there are extents, parameters that we stay within, because it's like,
Of course.
there are certainly diagnostic conditions that
Right.
would be fundamentally, like, quote unquote, you'd say is pathology, right? Is
Right,
something that
right.
is so severely malformed, for instance.
Right.
And again, it doesn't mean someone's lesser than, but what it's telling you is there's a fundamentally different trajectory.
Right.
But a lot of the kids that'll have a diagnosis of dysgraphia, dyscalculia, ADHD, these types of conditions, right, is fundamentally, it's we say it's neurodevelopmental, right? So it's just that the alignment within these cognitive networks aren't necessarily adapting to the real-time demands. Over time, it's not clicking.
They're not responding to the curriculum. They're
Right.
not responding to the Honda tools.
Right. So that's what I say. It's like
have that
the
brain.
environment, right, plays a very big role in how the brain's going to retaliate, respond, whatever. And so if you don't have the right environmental conditions, then naturally there's going to be misalignment there, right? And then the consequence is the more misalignment, naturally the brain's going to start responding like that, right? And then when we hit kids, that sounds awful, right? We start hitting this point where kids become, what are you doing? Become more emotional, right? Is how many kids you work with that, struggle with reading, and then it turns into this point of not only is it a struggle, but now they actively avoid it because they're embarrassed, or they get so emotional. They sit at the dining room table, parents get the homework, hey, look, we got to get this homework done, and I need you to read. And they just try and they try and they try, and eventually the brain's going to go, why?
It's not
why
working.
are we doing this anymore, right? And so then the emotion behind that, it really is an active prompt for parents to go, okay, this has kind of gotten beyond we're struggling, but now we're starting to see it manifest in multiple ways. And so I always look at it that way, is it's like there's so many things you have to account for, and to boil it down to a single term just feels cheap.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand the utility of it at the same point, because it dismisses all the complexity that has to go into any behavior that we have, right? Whether it's normal, abnormal, whatever. So again, I understand that you have to have a system in place to categorize this, because to not have anything, you hear them scratching back there. I don't know, what is it? What does that mean for dogs? Is it like
I think I think they're creating a
nest?
safe space, and I think they're also putting their scent down before
that's
they lay
interesting.
down. Yeah, because it goes through their paws.
You can get out of here, bud. That's door's open. But I always look at that, right? Is, because the diagnostic system is a reality, and we have to play within this system, we have to understand the utility of what a diagnosis works with, right? So obviously we're not just, as I said earlier, we're not pulling diagnoses out of a hat, not just handing out things.
Of course. Yep.
Obviously there's that idea of diagnosis shopping, which has always been a challenge with, some parents saying, potential secondary gain. And that's a lot of times more in like the adult population than
we
necessarily
rarely see
pediatrics.
that, I would say.
Right. And so that's another reason why I like pediatrics than adults, because you're not having kids that are faking, right?
Yeah, they're just honest little creatures that will tell you what they're thinking.
Wear their stuff on their
Easy.
sleeve.
Yeah,
right?
love it.
It's
Beautiful.
easier.
Adults are terrible. Yeah, go.
You say it's terrible?
Adults are terrible. They're
adults
so hard to work with, because you never know. Everyone's wearing a mask. You never know. I don't know what you're thinking right now, right? But a kid, the kids we work with will be like,
I don't know what I'm thinking. But it goes back to that point. It's like, it is a pathology-driven field, because I think that tries to reinforce the significance of a challenge. So we underscore that while I don't think something's wrong with the kid fundamentally in terms of their brain, certainly the adaptive challenges are there, right? So I'm not dismissing that there's consequence, right? There's always consequence to having a brain that doesn't align with it. And so when we in our field, right, we don't study the necessarily, we're not evaluating the structure of the brain. We're evaluating the symptoms of cognition, right? Is how the brain organizes and adapts thought and action, feeling, all that good stuff. But how that looks really requires the clinician themselves to have a good understanding. And I will venture to say a lot of graduate programs don't really go into that depth. They treat the diagnostic system like the checkbox of. I always think of it as like the I have a couple prac students, right? I talk to them about taking like an online quiz and saying, check that box. Oh, I've got anxiety because I checked 7 out of the 8 little boxes here, and it's like you've checked adaptive challenges that could be associated with a number of things, because again, there's not one road to Rome, there's many. Like that.
That just blew my mind. I gotta need a second.
Get a tattoo. But it's the reality of like the subjectivity, as you were saying, is there's so much. My mom calling. There's so much subjectivity to this field that it creates an opportunity for so many kids to have diagnoses that either are not warranted or are overweighted in their profile. So I still remember, I know I'm going on a tangent here, but I had a kid that was diagnosed, and when the initial clinician had talked to the parent about that, they kind of treated autism like it was like this, not something to be embarrassed about, but like I'm sorry, your kid's got autism.
I got some bad news for you.
What is that?
Right.
I mean, it's a term, obviously, again, brain's developing a little differently, but it's not a death sentence. I mean, if it was,
some of the greatest humans we ever interact with would fall somewhere on the spectrum.
Well,
right?
And any diagnosis, right? Tourette's. I mean, tics like a mofo.
I'm
almost disinhibited there enough to say bad word.
Whoa. We can bleep
I gotta
it.
keep my image. But same for you, right? It's like if a diagnosis meant a death sentence, you wouldn't be here.
Right. And again, it goes into that pathological orientation. But one caveat being that, we don't want to minimize, because there are conditions, as you alluded to, which is very important, that are really catastrophic. Mm-hmm. So whether it's an individual who's on the autism spectrum, or there's, thought disorders, whatever it may be, there are conditions that absolutely are so impactful, and they change the trajectory of the individual's life, and that individual should be provided with anything and everything they need to be happy, healthy, and successful, period. So we're never trying to minimize any outcome. So I don't want anyone to take that away. What we're really just talking about is those scenarios where there isn't necessarily just a perfect word that will change the game, or a word that is so descriptive, or a word that has now a treatment or a cure. So we're left in this space where we're trying to kind of navigate multiple systems, because we have the clinical system, we have our terms, and then most parents and most individuals we work with, the pediatric population, also require some form of support in the schools. And the schools have their own set of subjective classifications. And how many meetings have we been in where what we present, the school says, no, that's not it. And it's like, well, okay, well then now we're in a problematic situation, because we're arguing over the word that it's called. What I can tell you is that this brain is rolling differently, and there might be some new tools you guys should think about. So what if we went from tools, what's needed, to let's agree with how we classify that?
I was just thinking how many school meetings you've done where you go on this long tangent, like both of us have done already, and you just start talking about like all these mechanisms and how action selection and goal maintenance is held, and what the actual process of reading requires. And then it's just dead silent afterwards, because it's all awkward, like what just happened, like what are you talking about? But then when you break it down, this is my biggest issue, though, is because we have to convey this stuff in terms that people will digest, right? It's got to be palatable.
Right.
But when you do it, it dilutes what's actually happening. So when we say, oh, this kid's reading is inefficient, that again cheapens the cost at what's happening in the brain, or the mechanisms that give rise to sound symbol integration failure, whatever we want to call this. This is the problem, is because if they don't see a kid, underneath the waves, right? They're seeing them bob a little bit. They'll say, give it some time, maybe it's going to happen. And it's not a fault of a teacher or any one coordinator or anything like that.
Right.
But it's how the system's
individual.
The system's designed, right?
100%.
So the schools are hamstrung because their funding's allotted, they have a caseload, and it's not an excuse on anyone's behalf. But at the same point, as clinicians, we have the luxury of one kid, evaluate, and say, here's the goal of how we can support this brain. Now, how that adapts into the other systems, unfortunately, is not in our purview. Like, we can give all the recommendations, all the access points that we can, and obviously I think we do a pretty good job. It sounds narcissistic, but whatever, is giving parents a step to saying, how do we support your kid, not just at home, but in all contexts? Because this is your child. This isn't the school's child. This isn't your psychiatrist's child. At the end of the day, that's your child, right? And so as long as you have a good understanding of this, that's awesome. But if you can't do anything with it, then it's all for naught.
Yeah.
And so I always see it as like, okay, with school systems, how do we make sure that we're speaking the same language?
Right.
Because, right, the clinical systems, how many times you're in the meeting and they say, well, we don't work off of the clinical, we're IDEA, so different, justifications, discrepancy model, all that, right? And you sit there and you're like, what are we arguing about?
Right.
But at the same point, I mean, there's some level of like, I get it, they're in a system, but aren't we all? And so I always say, like, what's best for this kid, right? I don't care about
shouldn't
your caseload.
Be the only discussion? Shouldn't we get away from this idea that we're gonna all agree on something that's subjective? There's art up there. You all need to agree that of the 10 paintings, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that we have a system that is subjectively oriented, that we have to start from a subjective agreement to figure out what's needed. Why doesn't the system say, let's come to some type of agreement of what the strengths and what the areas of need may be and what the tools may be, what may be indicated. And then we can kind of figure out if we need to, within those systems, what do we need to call it to make sure, because that would be a patient-centered or student-centered approach as opposed to
I don't know how much time or how deep you really want to go here, but the reason, my thought on this, right?
Here we go.
The human experience is subjective inherently, right? So
100%.
we could both look at the same exact behavior and come to two different conclusions as to what it is. And so we rely in the school. Again, I'm not diminishing teachers. Teachers are amazing at their jobs.
Thing, right?
But they're not trained to understand what, what is inattention? If I ask people what inattention, they're going to look, he's staring out the window or he's staring down at his legs. The very stereotypical view of that. And I say, attention's not even a thing in a uniform concept, but distractibility doesn't have to mean some dramatic, episode. It could be internal. I could be sitting here right now looking you straight in the eyes, which is super uncomfortable. I hate looking in the eyes. Anyone in the eyes for that matter, not just you.
That was rude.
So
I was just going to say that. I was going to jump on. You're about to steal my thunder. I was going to say, I've been sitting here making eye contact and I haven't heard a word you said. I'm not paying attention. It looks like I am.
That's what I'm saying, though.
But I don't care what you're saying.
And so, ideally, to me, you are paying attention even though you're not, right?
Right. I fake it good with you.
But that's how our system's designed, is if I didn't see inattention, it doesn't exist, right? And so, in a lot of the school systems, what they're looking at, especially kind of the behavioral, not so much behavior's everything, but the non-academic medium, right? So they struggle socially or they struggle this. Well, they say they're really friendly, and it's like, is anyone questioning friendliness or intention? No.
No.
Execution, right? And so we assume that adaptation or maladaptive behavior rather has to have some very dramatic stereotype. I always joke about like Tourette's. I was like, to me when I was a kid, right? Big neck rolling tics, some phonics stuff, little throat clearing, repetitive sniffing. But if I asked the parents, like, what is Tourette's? They're going to think like South Park character, right?
So we set it up
because that's how society or that's how the media has shown that, right? And so everyone grasps to that notion, and then they work back from, well, I didn't see them say a curse word, so that's not Tourette's, or I didn't see them flap, so that's not autism, or that he's not bouncing up and down in his chair, so that's not ADHD. And you go, who told you that's what this means? Like, because again, it's a subjective medium, but it is objectified in the media as absolutes, right? So it's like, this is what you're looking at, and if it's not there, it doesn't exist.
And that's one of the problems with media itself and the world we live in.
Whole other matter.
Is this idea that if you were to Google or look up on a specific disorder, it's not going to take you to sort of the mildest iteration. You're going to go straight to the most intrusive and most maladaptive iteration. And so then we assign the word with those set of behaviors when so often that's not the case. And I think that's an important thing that we can do in our field, and something we need to think about more generally in mental health, is this idea that you and I take very seriously the role of supporting those who aren't overt. So you have an individual who is sitting in the back of the classroom, smiling, looking forward, but internally they've got a million different things going on. And so while they're not disruptive, they're not the squeaky wheel, are they therefore not entitled to the same supports as the individual who's much more overt and running around the classroom and in everyone's business? They absolutely are, but they don't get, because our eyes are the only method we have in this system, because the only way behavior will never ever be anything more than movement. You name a behavior, it involves movement. I promise you it can't be any other way, because that's all we can see. So one of the things we take pride in is identifying those who are more internally oriented. They may have the same level of dysregulation. A quick example for you rudely interrupt.
Yeah, I can't.
So as an example, let's just take anxiety. If you were to see somebody and they were shifting in their seat and moving, and you would be, how do you think that person's feeling? You'd be like, well, looks like they're kind of anxious. Could it be the case that the person sitting next to them, not making a movement at all and looking straight ahead, maybe even a slight smile on their face, is just as anxious as that person, maybe even more so? And the answer is, of course, yes, right? So the point being, we only have our eyeballs, it doesn't matter what field you're in, psychology, psychiatry, any form of mental health, education as well. We can only see, our only experience of an individual and who they are and what they're thinking and how they're feeling is through a process of movement behavior. But there's so much more to every human, you, me, than what our behaviors show.
So I call those the
duck. No way you can top that.
Well, you ready for this? Watch this. I'll blow you out of the water with like a little simple metaphor. Duck on the surface of a pond.
Yeah.
So they're kind of gliding on the surface, look very calm, cool, collected.
Yeah.
Beneath, there's a ton of activity, right?
Yeah.
And so again, we don't get to see it until it externalizes, right?
Yeah.
And so
Very good.
by the time it externalizes, it's already telling you that it's mounted, right? And so a lot of kids, and again, not to go like male, female presents different, but they do a lot of times in early development.
Right.
And so how many girls will get diagnosed with something like anxiety, an internalized condition, and then you'd say, the boys always get the external ones,
ADHDs,
right?
Yeah.
And it's so classic, it's so disproportional, and it's like, is it really that different? Or it's because we're observing behaviors.
Right,
So
the
boys are
behaviors
typically more mobile early on, right? And so this is where I get frustrated, is because there is, to your credit of that, how we identify symptoms is based off of observed action, but how we observe action is subjective in its own right? So it becomes more burdensome. So the only thing I take pride in, I tell parents, I'm not an expert on your child. You are. You know your kid's range of behavior, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between, better than anyone else on this planet. My job is to understand mechanisms behind behavior, right? So if you tell me my kid's distractible, I'm not going to say you're wrong, your kid's not distractible. Of course they are, but why? What's the condition that they're distractible under? Because attention's not this uniform thing, or my kid struggles with reading. Well, that's a big concept. Oh, shoot, I knocked your mic away.
Yeah.
That's probably going to make
blew everyone's
super loud noise.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
All the speakers are blown.
So do you know ASL?
Lawsuits go that way.
No, but I was looking at it that way, is because behavior is not a encompassing ball that everyone struggles with the same concept. It must manifest the same way. It's more so, do you understand what drives action? And so that's the only credit, that's the only value we have in this process. Is we're not reinventing the wheel for the parents. We're putting context to what they're observing, right?
Right.
I tell parents, if I tell you something about your child that doesn't sound right, tell me, because the last thing I want to do is say, I've observed some magical behavior that's never existed, and I'm going to say, I know more about your kid than you do.
Right.
No, but I can put context to what that means, right? And then more importantly, we can get the supports in place to make sure that the adaptive consequence is less, because we do so many things and throughout the day, and we just assume that because most people can manage it, that if you just push a little harder, they'll get through it. And I think that's where sometimes the school systems really struggle, is because their caseloads or because their funding or whatever, they'll go, we'll just wait and see kind of where they're going to go. Give it another year, see if their reading improves. If it hasn't, then we'll revisit this process. Well, parent wants to wait a year, and then you've missed a huge window of opportunity to support the kid. But that's a whole other matter.
Well, and then as we're talking about, then you have a huge number of individuals who don't overtly manifest it. So they're not going to even hit the radar until 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, if they ever hit it at all.
Yeah.
And if there's very few things in psychology and psychiatry that are absolutes, but one of them is, and it's true across the board, is early intervention is always the best intervention. So if you use a wait to fail model, you're literally promoting a model of failure. You are not proactively looking for those that do fly under the radar, and I think that's where we take pride in coming in, is really helping, the individuals that are more overt. They're easier to understand because we see it.
But they're getting intervention day one.
Exactly, because teachers frustrated or parents are frustrated because the behavior is disruptive to others, the teacher themselves, and again, none of this is about an individual. It really is about a system.
Yeah.
But then for those who are more internalized, too often and for way too long, they're flying under the radar using that wait to fail model, and a lot of these systems are wait to fail. So kind of winding the corner, and we're going to have lots more conversations because I just love chatting with you. I don't care if anyone watches it. It's just, it's interesting, usually to prove you wrong.
Invoice.
Those. So any just thoughts briefly on, we've seen a huge uptick in diagnoses, and some of the specific ones, they seem to kind of ebb and flow, but at the moment, we seem to have seen a huge increase in autism spectrum diagnoses. Any just, this could be a whole conversation itself, but what are your thoughts around the increase in the diagnosis of developmental disorders?
So, there's many routes to go here, right? You could say these differences have been around forever, and because there's more awareness, there's more identification. You also have, this might be a little more controversial, but pollutants, what we eat, all that stuff, genetics start to become a little bit more wonky and can lead to a little bit more, differences in how, brains are developing. Because again, we expect this trajectory for, humans. It's like, we're evolving and we're going to go on this linear path, and then everything's, we're going to get better and better and better and less maladaptive as we go. And it's like, but the conditions of our environment also matter. And so it's like technology, we would expect, when I was a kid, I didn't have a cell phone until like 7th grade. You didn't have a cell phone until you were like 35.
Like 43rd grade. Yeah, somewhere
exactly. So, but think about it this way, is a lot of times what we're looking at is like a kid glued on an iPad, and then a parent says, okay, we're going to pull this away. And then the kid freaks out and they go, oh my gosh, it's such a disproportionate reaction. Well, that iPad itself is giving so much stimulation to the brain that it's addicting, right? And so obviously, the word addiction has a whole nother matter in our field, but you could look at the reinforcement that something gives the brain that wasn't maybe available in the same immediacy as it was before. And so then we gauge, well, my kid struggles to regulate emotion, or they struggle to pay attention because the environment, not one person or anything, but how society's evolved, has created these dynamics where it's harder to do certain things that may have done before. And so it's, easier to spot something when it's failing or not adapting. And then, the other route to go is, as I said earlier, is we're looking at parents are trying to get ahead of the curve and rather than waiting. So again, I have a friend that's in Alaska who evaluates adults with autism. Big need for that apparently. And so you look at that as there's a lot of people that have gone throughout their life without some type of framework. And it's again, as I've tried to say 1,000 times already, a diagnosis does not define someone, but it certainly helps anchor support. And so it's like, if you kind of go around through your life thinking, this has always been a challenge for me, or I've had parents even in here where you go, like, you start talking about their kid and they go, God, that sounds a lot like me.
Yeah.
Or that sounds like dad hops on the feedback and says, are you reading my childhood book here?
Yeah.
Like, because again, you're describing patterns of behavior that have always existed, but now there's terminology around this that we can use to support. And that's why I go back to it. You're not curing or fixing something as you're allowing the brain to adapt more. And again, that's the goal. Adaptation is the goal. Allow the brain to operate, whether it's reading, it's writing, it's socialization, it's emotion. Lights are bright.
5 minutes is fully worn off.
100%. Goldfish moment. But that's why I get back to that point, is it's like, at the end of the day, we're just trying to figure out how do we support kids. And a diagnosis is the medium that we do that through. Yeah. Evaluations are kind of our tool, if you will, is to understand neurodevelopment through history, through testing, through observation. But at the end of the day, we're not changing who the kid is, as long as we're trying to say, how do we best build that blueprint for those working with them? Right. To say, it's not just that Johnny's a little, oppositional boy.
He doesn't care, he's not smart, he's
defiant. It gets intention, right?
Right.
And
that's going to serve a purpose. It's communication, right?
Right. That's where it comes.
So I think, in my view, we've created kind of this perfect storm. So the things you were talking about, we have food additives, we have changing dynamics in the environment with technology, we have all these different sort of physiological and environmental factors that may increase differences in how the brain develops and functions. So that certainly should be understood, investigated, and we need to figure out which one of those things are changing things that are causing frustrations or causing individuals to have a human experience that is not ideal for them. So put that aside. I mean, all that stuff I think is increasing, and then you combine that now with a system and a framework, which you keep alluding to, where the word gets loving, wonderful parents who really don't care what the word is, the tools that they know their child needs to be successful. Mm-hmm. So you have this perfect storm of environmental, physiological factors, along with a system that is a subjective system that's fully reliant on the fact that somebody says, your child has this word, now we can really help them out. So in that paradigm, or in that system, the larger system, where you have the mental health system that's pathologically based, you need a word to get the tools, along with those other factors, I think that is going to in many ways account for the increases. And individually, those would be interesting. We're going to have to start winding this down because there's a million different discussions, vaccines and food additives and environmental factors, technology and whatnot. But I know you wanted to say something, so I want to give you 3 seconds. Go.
I was just going to say, not necessarily like, okay, that's causing it, but it certainly exacerbates things that are already there, right? So you look at, studies on neuroinflammation. So I know you talked to Dr. Porter, right? Yeah. And so I'm sure that's something that you guys came up and talked about, because in the future they're going to talk a lot more about how like low-level inflammation is causing a lot of the syndromes that we're looking at here. And again, that's not something on the front line, because that's not something that's taught in graduate programs in psychology, for sure, right? Did you ever learn about low-level inflammation in your program? No.
You just look at behavior.
Right. It's
all behaviorally based.
And so again, I think it's a multitude of factors. I think there's normalizing the experience too. Obviously, I mentioned earlier, kind of sometimes people use diagnoses. This is why it's harder for like the older kids, maybe adults, is like using that to identify with something, right? Mm-hmm. Is I've had families in here where it's like I feel like my kid's just grasping onto this term because it gives them a sense of identity or belonging to a field. And again, that in itself is telling of something is changed about how this kid's operating, because that in itself tells you that they're feeling excluded and
trying to connect.
Yeah, and so we may not use the diagnosis that they're assuming, because again, it's not about being right or wrong to the kid as much as it's to being what's the most utilitarian. That's not.
That's going to be close.
That's something around circling the toilet bowl here. Something that has utility to making sure the most useful interventions are accessible, because at the end of the day, that's what we're looking at is support. Right. The diagnosis is the medium through that. So yes, there is prevalence rates of autism jumping, just like ADHD was jumping in the early like 2000s, and back when I was a child and you were middle aged, and then but it's so many factors. It's social, cultural, it's neurobiological, all that good stuff. But I'll shut up.
Awesome. No, I mean it really is. These, at the end of the day, as much kidding as we do, and as as kind of lighthearted as we are, that they are important topics to be discussed, because if we want to improve reality for anyone, and one thing that we'll close on, and then I have one more question for you here. But one of the things we talk about is that a diagnosis, the word is never an excuse. Effort is always in the calculation of success. If you're going to be successful, you're going to have to put forth the effort. So never should a word or a term or a diagnosis be used to eliminate the requirement to put forth effort and to engage in processes where you're trying to learn, or you're doing things to improve yourself. Effort's always a part of the equation of success, always. But there are different. If somebody has a different brain or a different physiological system, that individual may learn differently. They may use different workout machines to achieve the outcome. So effort's the expectation, learning, is an outcome, and we're always seeking outcomes. So if we apply our effort in different ways, using different tools, we can get to the outcomes we desire and deserve.
I'm not going to continue to open this can of worms, but what is effort?
Good question, because that's also subjective.
Right, because effort is observed strain, right? As I'm sitting, I'm trying really hard, but what does that actually mean?
Well, that is a whole nother, it's actually an amazing question. My short answer would be a time frame where there's attention and cognitive energy put towards something. That would be my answer.
Metabolic cost analysis.
Interesting. We'll have to
How
talk
much
about
energy's cost-benefit analysis for the brain is
Wow.
the matter.
That would be a really nerdy, which we are, way of looking at effort would be a metabolic expenditure of in different brain systems, attention systems, and sensory systems, and motor systems. Well done. We're going there. I have one question I ask everyone on a more personal side that you can't prepare for.
Yikes.
The blind side. So you got to pick a number. I'd like you to pick a number because you don't have to do anything. Between 1 and 4, and I'll ask you the question.
4.
All right. What's the best concert you've ever been to, and why?
What was I keep forgetting the one that was so miserable that we went to.
Oh my God, I don't want to say that outlet because they're an amazing band. I'm not going to say it. You're going to have to say it.
Deftones.
I'm taking the fifth. I cannot.
21 Pilots for sure.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I know
what about
you
it?
liked the Tool.
Tool's next level stuff. But what? So for you, what? For those wanting to get to know Dr. Mike here, what about that 21 Pilot show was made it the best ever?
Their music's beyond just the kind of superficial fluff stuff, which is always interesting too, because it's like everyone identifies with music differently, but I think a lot of their stuff's about mental health, right? They're talking about depression, they're talking about anxiety, they're talking about suicide, they're talking about rage, they're talking about joy, and it's like the way they do it with instruments, obviously, and it's two dudes doing the entire thing.
That's
which
crazy.
Is, in modern day is ridiculous because everyone has like 50,000 tech people.
They have a MacBook is what they have.
That's crazy. But the two guys that do it, it's pretty impressive. And like I said, they're very transparent about their own experiences and mental health and depression and all that good stuff.
So two individuals that put lyrics and music behind the human experience is something that drew.
Kind of like Linkin Park.
Yeah, right on. That's cool. Well, we're going to go see 21 Pilots. I can't wait. So that should be fun. Mike, Dr. Mike, I can't thank you enough. You really do change lives. I feel so fortunate to call you my friend, to have you as a business partner. We're going to have more conversations.
Appreciate that.
Like it or not, I'll force you to do that. And if people could follow anything of what we did, hopefully it takes some.
Yes, please.
Mike, thank you so much for doing this. We'll do it again. Lots more topics to be discussed. Thank you for joining us. Go to understandingexceptional.com. Go to the social media, all that stuff that you young kids do, and look forward to seeing you on the next conversation.